Hello, I'm Roisin, and these are my top 10 modern classic books. Hello friends, and welcome back to another top 10. You know how much I love doing these because I've done so many. Check out the playlist in the cards above if you want to see more of my 10 favourite books in any sort of genre. But today we're going with modern classics. Now, modern classics is another genre that's a little hard to define because when do you start saying something is modern? For some people it's when it becomes 20th century. For some people it's anything from 1950 onwards. I think that most of mine are after 1950, and some of these are very, very modern, as in 21st century, but I feel like these are books that are very well known, are talked about as part of culture, and so I feel like they can be counted as classics for that reason. They have transcended literature and people will know about them even if they haven't read them. Without further ado, let's get into the books. The first book that I put on this list is Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson, which is a semi-autobiographical novel about Jeanette Winterson's life growing up an adopted family in the north of England with a mother who is incredibly fanatically evangelical Christian and who brings her daughter up in the church. But when Jeanette starts to realise that she has feelings for women, has to reconcile that with the church and her family and the life she has lived up until that point. This book is incredibly beautiful. It is a sort of slightly fabulist book. There are a lot of dreams that have religious connotations or overtones in them that are kind of slightly surreal. A lot of strange things happen in this book. It is also filled with a lot of humour. Despite the abuse and tragedy that are described in this book, it is also very, very funny with a lot of the things that Jeanette doesn't understand because of the shelteredness of her upbringing. And there are also some really, really heartbreaking moments when Jeanette, because she is so sheltered, is taken advantage of. It is one that I think has such a good voice and is really good on audiobook because Jeanette reads the audiobook herself, and I feel like that Yorkshire accent really adds to the tone of the book. It's like when you're reading Seamus Heaney's poetry, it's so much better in a Northern Irish accent. When you're listening to when you're reading Jeanette Winterson, it's so much better if you have or can understand it through a Yorkshire accent because the sense of place is so strong in these books. I want someone who is fierce and will love me until death and knows that love is as strong as death and be on my side forever and ever. I want someone who will destroy and be destroyed by me. Number 2 is one that I've talked about a lot because it is one of my favourite books of all time, and that is The English Patient by Michael ONDAATJE. This won the Golden Man Booker, so it was the best Man Booker winner of the last 50 years a couple of years ago, and so I definitely think it counts as a classic. It is an incredibly beautiful, slow-moving, poetic book about 4 people who are living in an Italian villa after the Nazis and Allies have swept through Italy and have left this place alone. There is a man who is completely burnt from head to toe and only semi-lucid, the Canadian nurse who looks after him, her uncle who is a thief, and the sapper who lives in the garden trying to defuse a bomb. It goes backwards and forwards in flashbacks through time as we learned how this man, whom they call the English Patient, ended up in an Italian villa burnt to a crisp. And also it follows the experiences of these other 3 people during the war. The sapper who lives outside is a Sikh man, and it is about his experience as a Sikh man in the British Army, and it is also a meditation on desire and attraction, obsession, betrayal and racism, and it is an incredibly beautifully written book. That is one of the reasons I love it so much and that it has stayed with me so long. It is one of those books where you are highlighting loads of passages because they are just so stunningly beautiful and you have to go back and reread. It is also so slow moving that when things finally hit you, it takes you a moment to realise the emotional gravitas and impact that they have had, but because of that slow pace, it sticks with you for far longer. I believe this. When we meet those we fall in love with, there is an aspect of our spirit that is historian, a bit of a pedant who reminisces or remembers a meeting when the other has passed by innocently. But all parts of the body must be ready for the other. All atoms must jump in one direction for desire to occur. The next book is another one that I talk about a lot, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is set in the northeast of the States in, I think, the 1980s at a small liberal arts college, and at the beginning of the book there has been a murder. One of this group of elite Greek students who study, I think there are 5 or 6 of them in the class, one of them has been murdered. And throughout the novel we discover what happened, but it is more about the obsession between these 5 people and the newcomer Richard, who wants so much to be liked by and to be one of these people. It is about their pretensions, their obsessions with each other, their hatred and love, these sort of weird interlocking relationships where they don't like but they are stuck to one another, and about a terrible thing that they did one night. It is such an atmospheric novel. It is set so much in a cold New England winter, and it is so beautifully done, and it captures this elite, private, educated thing so well. It also captures this obsession with image and with how you are presenting yourself, and the shallowness and the fakery of this position so well. Incredibly witty and clever and satirical, and I really love the biting, beautiful commentary, whilst at the same time the mystery draws you on through the book. Does such a thing as the fatal flaw, that showy dark crack running down the middle of a life, exist outside literature? I used to think it didn't. Now I think it does. And I think that mine is this: a morbid longing for the picturesque at all costs. Number 4 is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, which is a very short dystopian novel about a world in which firemen, burn books. So firemen's job is not putting out the fires, it is starting the fires. It is set in a sort of shadowy dictatorship, and our main character is a fireman who burns books, who becomes disillusioned with why he is doing what he is doing, and sets out to escape from this world. This book is set in a world where everything is really fast moving, and television is an obsession. People are just sat down in front of the televisions, and when they drive down the motorway there is these big billboards that are huge because people drive so fast they have to be massive in order to be seen. It is about consumerism and about hiding knowledge, and for such a short book it really packs a punch. It is such sparse writing, but it is so well done and so evocative of this feeling of unease and being watched and being aware that everything you are doing is being monitored. It is such a tense little book, and I really love the themes that it explores. Stuff your eyes with wonder, he said. Live as if you'd drop dead in 10 seconds. See the world. It's more fantastic than any dream made or paid for in factories. Next is one that I only read this year because it was only published this year, and that is Hitting a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick by ZORA NEALE HURSTON. Despite the fact it was only published this year, it is a classic because all of the works in this book are short stories that ZORA NEALE HURSTON wrote during the 20s and 30s, which have been collected by the editors, some of which have not been republished since they were first published in magazines in their first iteration. ZORA NEALE HURSTON is incredibly famous for her classic novels such as Their Eyes Were Watching God, and her non-fiction such as Barracoon, but this collection of short stories was a really brilliant introduction. I loved the 2 introductions that were at the start of this novel: Tayari Jones, who wrote Silver Sparrow and An American Marriage, and by a scholar who has worked on Hurston's work. They really grounded me in the historical and cultural importance of these stories. But what really, really got to me about these stories is the simple and beautiful understanding of human nature. They are stories about sorrow, about greed, about trying one's best, about moving, about love, and about fear, and about violence, and about perseverance. And they are all so deeply rooted in the Black American experience, both in ZORA NEALE HURSTON's hometown in the South and also in Harlem, where she was writing most of these stories. They are so clever, so witty, so funny. They live with such joy and such brightness in them, even though they describe some horrible, really, truly horrible experiences. There is so much brightness and humanity and humour in all of them that you love these characters. They feel so fleshed out in a way that a lot of characters aren't in such short stories. I particularly loved the story Under the Bridge and Book of Harlem and The Book of Harlem. Both I thought were so witty and clever. It is one that I really enjoyed reading on audiobook, again because NEALE HURSTON uses African American vernacular English of the time, which is not something that I'm incredibly familiar with, and having someone who is read those to me really helped to ground these in place, because they are so of a time and of a place and of a culture, and that is one of the beauties and the strengths of these stories. I'm not going to read an extract because I don't feel that I can do the vernacular justice, but I would definitely encourage you to look it up, and I will leave some in the description. Next is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, and this one is definitely a classic and definitely a big part of the culture. I read this during my A-levels, and it was one that all of us who were reading it really felt was so incredibly powerful despite the simplicity of the prose. If you don't know, The Handmaid's Tale is about a futuristic culture, Gilead, set in the US, where there has been some sort of disaster. We're not really sure what has happened, and women are divided into 3 different sectors. So there are the wives, who are married to the commanders, the elite men in the society, the handmaids, who are the women who are still fertile, who are given to the commanders in order to produce children, and the gender traitors, I think is what they're called, who are women who are lesbians, who are sent to be sex workers, and then also women of colour are sent to the colonies to work. They are completely removed from the country. This is the story of Offred, who is the handmaiden of a commander, Fred, and she is it is about her small life. She is basically confined to her room, except sometimes she gets to go out to church to see and to important events of the overlords, and it is about her discovering their ways in which people are trying to resist. It is a very difficult to read novel. There is a lot that happens that is violent. It is also one of great stillness and beauty despite that. It is also one that has an incredibly clever ending which changes the way that you read the rest of the story, but I don't want to spoil it for you. But who can remember pain once it's over? All that remains of it is a shadow. Not in the mind even, in the flesh. Pain marks you, but too deep to see. Out of sight, out of mind. Next is another one that I read this year, and that is If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin. This is the story of Tish and Fonny, 2 young people who are in love and engaged to be married, and they are moving into their own place in Harlem in New York. They grew up in New York, and until one day Fonny is falsely accused of rape and is taken away to prison, and it is about Tish and her family trying to free him from prison, as well as flashbacks to their childhood and their burgeoning romance. This story is so warm and beautiful. It is so much about family and the loving relationship between Tish and Fonny, whilst at the same time being important commentary on the carceral system, the justice system, policing in New York, that despite the fact that this was written in the 1970s still feels unfortunately so relevant today. It is one that has, again, great heart, great warmth. James Baldwin really knows how to write swearing and insults. He is really, really good at that in this book. But he's also really, really good at writing that tender, intense, beautiful emotion between families and between Tish and Fonny. Tish's mother in this book is one of my favourite characters. The love that she shows for these 2 young people is so powerfully moving. James Baldwin is able to write characters that are complex, that are not wholly good, sainted characters, but also aren't evil, bad, nasty characters. He writes characters who have flaws and who do things that are wrong, and the ending of this book is really one that will break your heart. I guess it can't be too often that 2 people can laugh and make love too. Make love because they are laughing, laugh because they are making love. The love and the laughter come from the same place, but not many people go there. Number 8 is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, which is a novel that I can't really tell you that much about without spoiling the experience. But safe to say it is set in a traditional English kind of boarding school with these 3 friends who love one another. And in this boarding school, they're always encouraged to make art and to appreciate the beauty of life and the nature around them. It is one of those books where you don't really know what the time period is. It could be any time in the 20th century up until the future when you first start reading it, because it feels so distance from time. The way they are living in this small boarding school is so outside of the realms of the rest of the world. It is, again, slow-paced, atmospheric, very beautiful, and also an incredible commentary. It is science fiction, but I won't tell you any more than that. Love the way that Kazuo Ishiguro uses such beautiful characters to subtly and an understated way explore his bigger themes. It was like when you make a move in chess, and just as you take your finger off the piece, you see the mistake you've made, and there's this panic because you don't know yet the scale of the disaster you've left yourself open to. Number 9 is one that I absolutely love, and I feel like it's a bit of a cheat putting on here, but I definitely think has made its way enough into the zeitgeist to be talked about as a classic, and is definitely modern, and that is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, my favourite series of all time. This is the story of Thomas Cromwell and his life from growing up as a boy in Putney until, in this first book, until the Execution of Thomas More and the Marriage of Anne Boleyn to Henry VIII. This is such a clever book. This book, you on Thomas Cromwell's shoulder, you are walking with him through the Tudor period. It is a cacophony, a symphony of voices, a look at history through ghosts and through a present understanding. You are in Cromwell's life. You are not looking at it from present day into the past, but nor are you pretending you can get inside his actual mind. It is a study of memory and how people understand themselves, of identity. It is about power and how people can get it, the machinations of court, and it is so well done. It is one that some people find a little complicated to read, but if you do, I would suggest either listening to the audiobook or just letting go a little bit of perfect understanding, and you will eventually tune your mind into reading it. It is so powerful and beautifully written. It is one where the characters stick with you forever, and where you feel this impending sense of doom because you know a little bit of the history, you know what's going to happen, but you are still on the edge of your seat waiting for it to happen and begging that people don't make the decisions that they end up making. It is one that is incredibly skillfully done. There is so much power in this. It is not written like a history textbook. It is written like this one man's experience of life in a historical time period, and the language is so perfectly poised as to leave you feeling like you are inside a Tudor period yourself. The trouble with England, he thinks, is that it's so poor in gesture. We have to develop a hand signal for "back off, our prince is fucking this man's daughter." He is surprised that the Italians have not done it, though perhaps they have and he just never caught on. And then the final book that I want to talk about is Nights at the Circus by Angela Carter. It may be safer to say that Bloody Chamber is a modern classic, but Nights at the Circus is a novel, and I wanted to talk about it because I love it so much, and Angela Carter is such a strong writer. Nights at the Circus is the tale of Feathers, a working class girl who has grown the wings of a swan and works at a circus as an aerialist, and nobody ever knows truly if those wings are natural. We follow a journalist as he joins the circus and travels by train across Europe, drawn into the web of Feathers' life. This is another novel that is incredibly atmospheric as we travel on trains through Russia and into Siberia. It is a slightly magical novel where you never know what's going to come around the corner, and it is set in a circus, which is one of those things that I love in books. Carter's writing is so real and visceral. Everything is so physical and embodied. It feels fleshy and real. This story is at once both whimsical and magical, and also very gritty and down to earth. It is a study of class and gender, and it is incredibly beautifully done. And conversely, she went on to herself, sneering at the Grand Duke's palace. Poverty is wasted on the poor, who never know how to make the best of things, are only the rich without money, are just as useless at looking after themselves, can't handle their cash just like the rich can't, always squandering it on bright, pretty, useless things in just the same way. So that is all of my top 10 classic novels. Please let me know in the comments down below what your favourites are. And if you've read any of these, I would love to hear what you thought about them, because I love talking about books that I love. Thank you for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. I would really appreciate that. And to subscribe if you haven't, which I know 50% of you haven't, and so I would love it if you would, because I put out new videos every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday. So I will see you again soon. Bye bye.